today until 5:30 p.m. So there should be plenty of time to get through everything. So with that, I'll just give a quick introduction of some of the panelists that we have today. So Tara Baracus is going to kick things off. She is with the Community Corporation in Santa Monica. Next, we will hear from John Delaney of Coing Eisenberg Architecture. We'll then hear from Tim Kohut, who's the Director of Sustainable Design at the National Community Renaissance. And finally, Jason Lorcher of Green Dinosaur will present. And as I said before, my name is Matt Goff. I work for the Sierra Club as a senior campaign representative working on building electrification across the state. So we've got a lot of great content for you all today, and I'm going to pass it over to Tara now, who is going to kick us off. So Tara, take it away.
Great. Hi, everyone. So glad you're with us this afternoon. And my name is Tara Baracus, and I'm the Executive Director of Community Corporation of Santa Monica. We're a nonprofit affordable housing owner and operator. And I'm going to kick off our conversation today with framing about why should we decarbonize affordable housing in particular. So if we could go to the next slide, I'll get started. So just to give you a little context about us, Community Corp has been operating since 1982 in Santa Monica. We have about 100 buildings, and we've recently made a decision to expand to other parts of the west side of LA County. So we're basically building in the most expensive parts of LA, and so that may inform a little bit about our conversation and some of the challenges that we're facing. But obviously one of the advantages to working where we are is the relatively cooler climate, being in sort of a coastal zone. So next slide, please. So, you know, when I think about decarbonization, I automatically just think about social justice and the intersectionality of making sure that people with lower incomes are living in healthy environments, because that's not necessarily what's happening across the state of California, unfortunately. Low-income people are the ones who are most vulnerable, most subject to unhealthy conditions, whether it be overcrowding, substandard living conditions, moldy environments, living near polluted areas. And so the only way to rectify or provide more equity is to provide high quality affordable housing that is also healthy. So healthy indoor environments, access to fresh produce, and fitness opportunities. So, you know, decarbonization is sort of going to the next level, and certainly when we think about climate change, you know, we recognize that social justice has so many components and they all have to work together. So, you know, as much as we're trying to uplift a low-income community, we also care about the greater community, which is our planet and the climate. And so I feel a deep sense of responsibility to make sure that our buildings are also not contributing to global warming, but actually can be regenerative, will be the ultimate goal. And, you know, there are many benefits to that. You know, it's sort of the triple bottom line as we speak of when we talk about LEED, but, you know, being able to both impact people's lives positively, but also the planet, and then also profit, which, you know, for us just means better cash flow. You know, our buildings need to be sustainable economically for the long term. And when there's additional cash flow, we can spend that money on things like more gardens or better service programs for our residents to really bridge the gaps for them. And also, I do believe that we have a responsibility as socially oriented leaders to set an example for the rest of the building industry, to say, if we can figure this out, if we can build affordable housing in the most expensive parts of the state, why isn't everybody else doing it too? So that's sort of my frame of mind on this topic. So let's go to the next slide. The other thing I think we want to talk about today is the future. So certainly, you know, there's a lot of things going on that give us things to think about. But when I think about my goals for building affordable housing, I'm thinking 10, 20, 30 years out, and thinking not only does the housing need to be economically sustainable for the families that are living there, but we need to think about where things are going. So thinking about the fact that, you know, if we don't all adhere to the Paris Climate Accord and we don't do our part to keep the global warming down, and that means every single building, then we're going to be in a catastrophic situation. So the sooner we start addressing it, building by building, portfolio by portfolio, the better. So when I think about the future, I think about buildings like the ones you see below, which is one of our buildings that was completed about 5 years ago. You know, they're all going to be energy efficient. This particular building is producing as much solar energy as consumption. So it's, you know, basically net zero in that sense. I think all buildings are going to need to be like that. The grid's not going to be able to have the capacity to serve the future. So we need to all start doing our part now. The housing also needs to be in places where it makes sense. And there's a lot of smart growth principles that I'm sure you're all aware of. But housing should not be in the outlying areas. Housing should be in areas where there is already a good supply of quality jobs, quality transit, schools and parks. You know, when I think about the future, I think about walkable neighborhoods. I don't think about sitting in gridlock for 2 hours to get to my job. So that's where I think we all need to go as an industry. And at the same time, you know, our housing, as we all know now, going through what we're going through, it needs to be a place of comfort for us, a place of feeling good, secure, and certainly healthy. So if you look at the bottom left photo, that's one of the units at the High Place building that's pictured on the right. And, you know, it evokes this feeling of getting natural air and light. And those are the things that I think empower and uplift people and make them feel good. So that's kind of what I think of in terms of the housing of the future. So go to the next slide, please. So, you know, obviously it sounds all wonderful, but, you know, the devil's in the details, as they always say, and in particular for the design community, you know, it's quite a challenge. And, you know, as an owner, I'm the one, you know, hiring a design team and saying, okay, I want to do this, and now I leave it to you all to figure it out. You know, I do think it's important as clients and as owners that we have a very firm commitment on our vision and our values and our mission, and bring that to the design team right at the very beginning and make it clear that we will not accept anything less. And this is what we want to achieve with this building. This particular building is a pilot we're doing right now in Santa Monica, right along the ocean, and it's going to be a conversion from an older building into an all-electric, revitalized building. So we're very excited about it. So my expectations of the design team whenever I'm looking at a new project, whether it's a pilot or just any project we're building, is we're all going to commit to the sustainability goals up front. It's going to be challenging. We are going to need to make sure we can both meet the goals, but also our cost, upfront costs and long-term goals in terms of performance. And we need to make that a priority. And sometimes it is hard. There's competing priorities. And, you know, we have to just stick with the commitment all the way through. Otherwise, we can't get to where we need to go. And certainly, I think, you know, there's one set of challenges with new buildings, especially in urban infill areas like the West Side where we're building. But, you know, retrofitting is a really important topic that we're going to need to figure out together as a group. How do we convert a lot of these poor performing old buildings in a way that's not going to break the bank? So, you know, no small task, but I know this group is up to it. So I'm going to hand it off to some of the experts to talk more about that. Thank you.
Hi, my name is John Delaney. I'm an architect with Koenig Eisenberg Architecture in Santa Monica. We're an architecture firm that does projects of every type, but affordable housing is one of our specialties. You can go to the next slide. So I just wanted to talk for a second about why are we doing building decarbonization? It's not just about promoting technologies or building systems. It's really about helping vulnerable populations by improving health. And it's also about preserving ecosystems by limiting the impact of climate change. So affordable housing provides permanent, stable, high-quality residences for those populations, ranging from formerly homeless individuals, disabled veterans, to low-income families. So given the massive statewide shortage of affordable housing, it makes sense that this is where our conversation about decarbonization starts. Next slide. There's really strong evidence that climate policies improve public health and reduce inequality, and the benefits are greater in disadvantaged communities, and that's why architects should really be advocates for decarbonization. Next slide. So it's really important to keep yourself, your client, your colleagues, and government agencies up to date about the rapidly changing marketplace and regulatory environment for affordable housing. It's important to promote the value of architecture and building more healthy communities, and also leveraging the architect's training to develop easy to understand communication tools like Tally and COTE tool. So not to get too bogged down in charts, graphs, Excel spreadsheets, and things like that. Next slide. This is just a summary sort of the marketplace and regulatory environment that we're normally dealing with. And most of these things are common to every project, but it's really the financing that I think is most unfamiliar to architects. Because when governments sort of receive government money in the form of either tax credits or subsidies, these are the things that actually establish sort of target energy goals and baselines rather than code or green certifications like LEED. So you have to really learn how to reconcile all these different project requirements and really understand them to give the best advice to your client. And it's also important to understand technologies in that you need to advocate for these systems to your client because, you know, at some early stages when critical decisions are being made, all your key team members might not be in place. So it's really important to advocate for those new technologies and keep yourself educated. Next. This is a really great image by David Baker Architects. It's a really simple diagram of units in sort of a mid-rise application, which is what we're generally working in affordable housing. Where units are modeled without sunshades, and they just kind of show which units receive the most solar heat radiation. So you can really use these easy to understand graphic tools to really focus your material investment in terms of sort of where you want to put sunshades and maybe more cost intensive materials, because we're typically working on sort of fine margins in affordable housing. So there's always, when you're thinking about value engineering, you really want to make sure that your materials are going in the place where they can be most effective. Next. Team building is another really important way an architect can contribute to the process of decarbonization. It's really about building a great team that has experience in creative thinking, shared values, and probably most importantly, collaboration, because we really want to make sure that all the team members are talking and all the team members have the same sort of goals in reducing energy use and providing the most sustainable, long-lasting building possible. Next. It's also really important to effectively plan and prioritize to ensure successful results. So we really want to set ambitious goals at the beginning, realistic goals that we can achieve with sound fundamentals and cutting-edge technologies. And really decide where can we make the most impact for the least expense. That usually comes in as prioritizing passive design strategies and right-sizing program by putting shared facilities such as play and laundry as outdoor or unconditioned social spaces. So they serve a double function, both as building infrastructure and also as a social space that becomes part of the architectural design. And it's also important to consider what makes the most local sense in your area. So access to expertise, materials, clean grid energy, and on-site renewables. And also just having architectural responses that are climate oriented. Next. So when we talk about design decisions, we're typically talking about form and orientation, roof form and slope, structural system, and so on. But I think it's starting to get to the point where we need to think of these as both decisions and then the energy benefit that we're receiving from these. decisions that, so next slide. So that, when we talk about form and orientation, the benefit we get from that from an energy use standpoint is solar geometry and access to sunlight, both in terms of powering your PV system and also just having daylighting in both your units and in your courtyards and planted areas. Next. Start to show a few project images. This is the Arroyo. This is a project we did with Tara and CCSM. This is a good example of how passive design can really work well in a project with the sort of a narrow floor plate and long east-west oriented courtyard with windows that face north and south to get sort of the optimal orientation and really have as much light as we can get in a social courtyard that becomes kind of the social focus of the building. And you can see how that translates into the interior of the units. Pretty ample light and really great views to the mountains and to the beach on the other side. Next slide. This is a great example of sort of how passive design can work. This facade faces just west of north, and you might think that if you're just looking at a plan that you wouldn't get, you wouldn't necessarily need to shade these windows as intensively as we did, but as we did some studies, it turns out that that facade did need sunshades, and you can see how in the afternoon these sunshades really are effective in shading all of the windows on that facade. So that really helps cut down on energy use. And that's really what we're trying to do is with passive design strategies is cut down on any sort of loads that build up, so you don't have to account for them with active systems. Next. So a lot of times, so when we're thinking about passive design, we want to create an energy budget, and these are sort of the activities that you think about with affordable housing and the occupants, not only the occupants, but also building infrastructure. Next slide. So energy that we can energy use that we can tackle generally with passive design: air heating and cooling, ventilation, lighting, and elevators. You can, just by proper orientation and by proper window wall ratio and orientation towards views and daylighting, you can really knock a lot of energy use off your baseline. Next. So these are examples of components of the building where we'd want to address with better technology. Water heating is a big topic these days with heat pump technology. SCE is now incentivizing purchasing domestic heat pumps, so it's really a technology that's growing. Laundry is actually another interesting example. Generally, we provide centralized laundry because it's part of NOFA, which is one of the financing organizations. So we're supposed to provide laundry machines, but it's sort of an example of equity that you need to provide infrastructure to the building that really makes it feel like a home, like it's domestic, like you're getting all the amenities that anyone could expect to receive in a home. So we wouldn't do things like provide like balconies that are too narrow, or provide a place just to hang clothes, because those can feel quite institutional if they're not really good. Next slide. This is a project that we're doing in Walnut Park in sort of East Los Angeles. This is an all-electric building, and I just wanted to point this out because this one we are designing with a centralized heat pump system, 2 Colmac units and 3 storage tanks. And the size of the pump room that we put on the ground floor was only 300 square feet with a ventilation grill to the outside for fresh air movement. So we were surprised at actually how small that was for a 58,000 square foot building. And we also are providing ceiling fans in every bedroom and living room, because one of the best ways to prevent someone from using the air conditioners is to provide a ceiling fan. We find that it's a very low energy use technology. It's an old technology, and it really works well. Next. This is a building at 1015 Vermont. This is near Los Feliz, and this is on top of a metro station. So reducing sort of vehicular miles traveled is a great way of also decarbonizing housing. And providing sort of a minimum amount of parking stalls required. We're only providing commercial on this one because it's a mixed use property, and there's some retail and restaurant. But this is also a good example of how rapidly laws regarding electric vehicle charging stations are changing. So there was just a new ordinance issued by LA in January 2020 that requires far more EV infrastructure stalls and installed parking stalls required. So the laws are changing very rapidly with regard to EVs. Next. This is a Floor 401. This is a project we're doing in downtown Los Angeles. This sort of highlights a number of challenges we face with doing urban infill projects. You want to get enough light into the courtyard, so you design kind of a wide courtyard, but you get very narrow floor plates, especially with studio units, which are narrow as it is. So if you look at the top right image, you can see how much space is being taken up by the sort of maintenance area and the tiebacks and the parapet-mounted mini-split heat pumps. This takes up a lot of room. So by the time you're able to install a PV array, it's actually quite a small area. So you really need to just take what you can get. Next. And you know, I want to touch on materials for just a second, because there are fossil fuels that are within materials, and there's a really great study about how many times fossil fuels are referenced in architectural specs. And it's really mostly in 4 sections, 6, 7, 8, 9. And so you can really just take a look at this small slice of materials, and really, if you do a good job, you can really eliminate a lot of fossil fuels if you choose the right materials. Next. And that's pretty much it. I've made a list of sort of, at the risk of going over time, I made a list of other challenges and opportunities, but yeah. I'll just hand it over to the next person.
Well, it looks like a little surprise here. We changed the order slightly, but I'm ready to go. Hi, I'm Jason Lorcher with Green Dinosaur, and I hope everyone can hear me okay. Next slide. So obviously today there's a lot of conversation of what the new normal looks like after the pandemic. And I guess for the purpose of our roundtable discussion that we'll get into later, I'd like to pose the question for everyone here on the call is how you envision our industry will evolve. And at Green Dinosaur, we've pondered the question ourselves. And I guess for us, it's a new normal of a all clean, all electric path that creates opportunities for people in our world that is based on social justice. It's really time to evolve how we design, build, and work. And we're hoping to get some of that today with all of you in this conversation. Next slide. So I'm going to review 2 projects with everyone. Both projects were kind of envisioned around the same time frame, around early, I guess, 2012, 2013. So they've been 7 years in operation, so to speak. Well, not 7 years in operation. They've been 7 years in the design. From design, now they've probably been in operation for the last 4 years. So Cedar Springs, all-electric project in the city of Laverne. It's 36 multifamily apartments for transitional aged youths. These are youths that have transitioned out of the foster care system. So at 18, they go in and now they're on their own to live and figure things out. But this project was great. It had Living Building Challenge as a goal. And that kind of set the mark that we were going to have no combustion on site. So next slide. Just a little bit of facts and figures on the Cedar Springs apartments there. It did achieve LEED Platinum and included all electric systems, so high efficiency heat pumps. Now, these heat pumps were hitting SEERs of over 19 and heating seasonal performance values of over 11 for sure. It also included a sizable photovoltaic array that was, I believe, 85 kW, and domestic hot water heat pumps, and a lot of site verifications that others on the call have been involved with. And so, you know, doing an all-electric building, you really want to focus, as John mentioned, on the envelope and your materials and shading, and really bring the energy down. And in this job, it was under an older code cycle. and that code cycle was achieving 50% better than energy performance, and that's before you even take into account photovoltaics. So next slide. So we had the Silver Star Apartments. That was a 49-unit, formerly homeless vets project in Los Angeles, also targeting Living Building Challenge, and was all electric. Once again, this project had a similar design, design of mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems to go all electric with domestic hot water heat pumps, also going with a sizable photovoltaic array, which was on the roof, a 160 kW photovoltaic array, and the split system heat pumps, super high efficiency as well. Next slide, please. And then kind of final note, just looking at this, overall diagram, you can see photovoltaic panels on the roof, and it's exceeded performance by 50%. So, we're looking at these projects that were under 2008 Energy Code, 2013, 2016. Now we're in 2019, and we're looking forward to 2020. And also very excited to see the AIA submission on backing an all-electric design that was submitted recently to the CEC. I just wanted to mention that as we move through these different code periods that, as the time-dependent values have become more stringent, we could expect maybe a 50% performing 2013 project to maybe look like a 5% better than 2019 Energy Code. Just a side note. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about challenges and opportunities. I mean, some of the things that I wanted to mention on this is obviously conceptual design and understanding how the energy use is a big factor at this stage of a project. Everyone's well-versed with how to run charrettes and make project goals and things. And also early energy analysis takes place to understand what those loads are and how to, orient and mass and really, site a project. This is nothing new for us, but there are complexities that we'll need to engage the utility companies on. Obviously, the demand on electrical service size is much different, and those things will need to be taken into account. And I want to make one plug here for a company called Redwood Energy. They have a great guide that initiates conceptual design goals, and it's called a Zero Emissions All Electric Multifamily Construction Guide. And I think we're going to provide that link later, but I just want to mention there's so much information out there right now, whether it's from the Rocky Mountain Institute or even, going to Living Building Challenge and reading about all electric buildings, that this should really help our industry in moving things forward. Next slide. Okay, so as designers, architects, engineers, sometimes we feel like we're climbing a mountain every day, right? We're all involved with all the details. We're actually trying to foresee the future with our tenants and as well as the facility managers and how they'll operate the building. Next slide. So in this situation on one of the projects that we had an all electric building, the foresight to find out how to get to the roof was slightly overlooked and had to be mitigated with a 3-story ladder on the side of the building. As you go up, next slide, you start to peek over the parapet and you go next slide and you see that it looks like a kind of a hazy look out over a large photovoltaic panel. And next slide, as you get closer, you understand, well, it's very hard to get up the side of a building. Next slide. When you have a 3-story ladder, and as you see, the maintenance on these panels didn't really turn out too well. And then another feature, next slide, as you wipe down, you see how possibly they would look when they're clean. Now, obviously, this sort of residue was probably over a 4-month period, which is about 15 to 30% reduction. And as a lot of affordable housing developers that might be on the call are saying, well, how do I budget for the cleaning costs and all these things? And well, quite frankly, there's a lot of challenges to make sure that we can continue to achieve the performance on these high performing buildings. Next slide. And so then it comes to the next challenge and opportunity of accessibility and maintenance and, you know, positions of solar systems. I think I just want to mention here that it's so important to verify and maintain systems. And if you're walking up 3 stories to get to inverters and you really want to check, I know we have everything tied into an IP address, but if you really want to verify that inverters are calculating the production of the panels and you're going to maintain it, you really need to think of these things up front, and you make it a priority during design to just, you know, think about how is this thing going to be maintained. So that goes true with balanced ventilation systems, fan coil units. I know as architects, we always want to hide all the beautiful mechanical systems, and makes me sad, but we got to figure out ways to do that. So then also another challenge and opportunity that we can probably discuss in our roundtable a little more would be the ongoing training. And since this was primarily focused on decarbonizing kind of housing and affordable housing, I know the technical expertise on maintaining the buildings is slightly limited. And, you know, we really need to work with everyone. I think the thought here that I thought would be a nice kind of change of pace for our projects is to actually identify a champion that's living in these multifamily housing complexes that would be a champion of energy and community that we could get excited about how to actually, you know, help maintain a behavior around the project that actually reduces energy. Next slide. And then my final comment here, I really just want to say that we really got to maintain and verify and check things out. And when checking those things out, that could involve, you know, integrating with a WeGoWise system where you actually have the utility data in front of you and you can back check it. But those things really are guides to also how you can improve your future designs. So really pushing for verification and having money in the budgets during your operations of these facilities to do verification and ongoing post-occupancy evaluations. And then with that comes to the last slide. So to wrap this guy up, I just want to say that we want to leave no living organism behind, all right? And on Green Dinosaur's website, we do have a number of resources which may provide additional lessons learned so that we, the AE community, can continue to evolve. And thank you.
All right, I guess I'm the anchor man on the team. I was expecting Jason to fill that role, but I'll try to do it myself. I'm Tim Cohut. I am Director of Sustainable Design at National Community Renaissance. We're kind of a unique animal in the affordable housing industry. We are developers, we are builders, and we manage our properties and we provide resident services. So we are all in, you know, sort of from day one until the day I retire and beyond. So when we look at affordable housing and what I sort of call cost-contained high performance, our goals are kind of set on the first day, how the building is going to operate 15 years, 20 years down the road. So these conversations about electrification are really important to us, and they need to be placed strategically for us. So our commitment to sustainability includes a couple of different achievements. We've been named a power builder by the U.S. Green Building Council 2 years in a row. This one was, the announcement was in 2018, and they announced last year that we repeat awarded about 3 or 4 weeks ago. So as far as I know, it's a designation given to about 20 builders nationally. I think we're the only affordable housing developer builder on that. The other thing that's unique to National Community Renaissance is we're the first developer to actually sign on to the AIA 2030 commitment. And while I work for a developer and a builder, I'm an architect and I'm a certified energy analyst. So my role is to really coach the teams to hit what we define to be our long-term goals for energy and sustainability. So I want to talk about the economics of this really quickly, because the point that I'm going to try to emphasize in the slides that I have in front of us and the work that we do, and if you've heard me speak about this before, even though I'm an environmentalist, even though I can appeal to the sensibilities of clients like Tara, because I know she's a tree hugger, I'm never going to win the argument that we should be doing these things because of environmentalism. It's a tangent factor, and you can tell from my surroundings that I am an environmentalist. So, but what I want to talk about here is, just to set the stage for this, is the slide here is identifies what's known as Swanson's law, and it says that every time that worldwide capacity to produce PV panels, manufacture and distribute them, doubles, the worldwide cost for those panels drops by 20%. And while these are important to people like me who kind of nerd out on this stuff academically, it's important to us because I work for a general contractor and we're pricing this stuff and we see these savings every day. We watch the price, the installed cost go from $3.50 to $3 to $2.75 to $2.50 to $2. It's happening every single day. And when I make these points and I get into these conversations with people, I tell people that you have to do this now because we've reached beyond the point of what we call grid parity, the point at which it is cheaper for you to buy your electricity from rooftop solar than it is to buy it from the grid. And it's only going to get better. So we really need to approach this in a different way. So let's take a look at how we approach our projects. And there's a couple slides in here, courtesy of Studio E, who we work with down in San Diego. These are some projects that we had, we finished and that we have ongoing with them. So how do we approach these projects? This is San Ysidro Senior Village. It's a 51 unit, 3-story project centered around a courtyard. It's housing for the formerly homeless in San Diego. And it's built on a shoestring budget. So when we looked at this very early on, the architecture team came up with a strategy to sort of maximize use of the site, create some great outdoor spaces, create what we like to call some signature architecture. But we had to do this on a budget, and I always have goals for deep use of and deployment of renewable energy systems. So when I'm on the calls with our design teams, they constantly hear me say, I like that idea, but I really want, I want renewable energy. So we've really got to conserve in the way that we approach this. So the key to this, the key to any good process is a study of the economics. It can't just be landing on ideas and the newest thing and saying we've got to do this, even if we're talking about, you know, electrification and carbon neutrality. What we have to really focus in on with the affordable housing community are the economics of this. So before we get in, we'll look at this, and this is an economic analysis I did for San Ysidro Senior Village. You do a conceptual energy model, and I'll show a slide of that in just a second. And you take that energy use profile out and you plug it into something that's going to give you identify what your operational energy costs are going to be. So 51 units of special needs housing, it's master metered. My operational energy costs for this project are going to be $56,000 a year. So this is what the development team is going to plug into their budget, right? On a normal day, $56,000. So then I look at it and I'm like, that's a lot of money. You know, we'll take a closer look at that. So to look at this a little bit more closely, what we need to do on this, hit the next one. So designing for PV now, Title 24, I call this 101, PV 101. This is what we all need to be doing. This is a new project we're starting, or this is still San Ysidro Senior Village. We started looking at the way we would deploy PV on the project and maybe the way we would use solar thermal, because the project was conceived with natural gas originally, and then we started wandering into the AIA 2030 challenge. And we hand that off to our architect. And what the architect does for us is come up with these ideas to get it on the building in a way that we can then look at the renewable energy footprint versus the utility grid footprint. And what we want to do here is we want that green piece of the pie to be almost all consuming. We want very little, blue pie here, but you're going to run out of roof space in a lot of these projects, which is what happened to us here. But this has meaning for us. So when we look at the architecture of this, it needs to breathe of sustainability. It's important, right? But to me, it doesn't matter. I mean, if it makes the point and it's sustainable, I tell you, it's going to be more poetic. So when we finished the project and we landed as much PV on this building, it tells a really compelling story for us. But that's a coincidence. It's important to me. It doesn't need to be featured. It doesn't need to be in your face. What's really important to me are really getting back to the economics of this. So what we want to do when we start new projects is we want to keep in mind our long-term targets. And we're looking at reporting to the AIA 2030, the AIA-DDx. And so, zero net energy building, or very close to it, a lot of PV on the roof, I think I should be doing pretty good, right? So anybody who's looking at the DDx is used to the energy use intensity, the predicted energy use intensity. That's my number. That's my predicted number from my energy model when I was all done. That was my goal. I was supposed to be at 9. I was at 23. And I'm slapping myself and the team on the back saying, hey, that's a great project. We almost got to zero net energy building. And then I do the analysis and I'm at 23. And I'm saying, what the hell's going on? So if you look at this, this is really important. This is the most important thing if you're working in affordable housing. This is the most important discussion. Natural gas has been tied to heating hot water for the longest time. Central systems are the most important things to put in, but they suck up 20% of your building energy, right? So if you think you're gonna have a zero net energy building and you have a natural gas boiler, you're gonna be looking at me and you're gonna suck it up and you're gonna put in your numbers in the AIA-DDx and you're gonna say, yeah, we tried. We had a lot of PV, it's great, but it still sucks because it's got a natural gas boiler. So we've got to approach it a different way on this. So the next project we're looking at, the day one approach, you got to look at the analytics. So this is San Ysidro Senior Village, again, another project with Studio E. And what we did on the first day is I get in and I'm looking at the conceptual energy. So I'm simplifying the design as much as I possibly can. And it's just a heat balance equation. You don't need to define every single window. You need to understand what your window to wall ratios are, where your residential units are, where your commercial units are, and what the orientation is. And then you can start describing what the wall assemblies are. And when you look at this, then you can start to look at things like the domestic hot water. So here I am, step 1, 97% efficient natural gas boiler, predicted EUI 23. Hang on a second, let's go with the heat pump boiler. New technology, it's out there, the state's pushing us in that direction. I just cut my energy use down because my heat pump boiler is 3.5 times more efficient than the most efficient natural gas boiler, okay? So suddenly I'm doing really well, but I still got to make the economic message, the economic argument for this. So the last piece of this is, now I'm going to drop on some PV. Right now we're talking, now I'm going to make some money. So now I can take that, and with good modeling software on day one, before you do anything, you've defined what your goal is in terms of your energy use for the AIA-DDx. You're looking at your economics. You're giving the owner some decisions so they can look at their operational budgets. And now you can go back and actually start making the argument that this makes economic sense. So let's go back to San Ysidro Village really quickly, finish up that conversation. You got to buy the PV system. And I always tell our development team, hey, don't worry, if you can't buy it, we'll find a way to get it on the building. Okay, so this was the breakdown for the lease. If I'm going to lease the system, if I didn't have enough money to buy it, my PPA, my lease payments are going to be $16,000 a year, but my normal costs were $47,000. So I'm making $31,000 a year just by leasing it, right? So I'm like, why would you not do this? But maybe Tara gets to the end of her project and she's got some owner contingency left over, which is where I like to live because PV is the last thing I could put on a building that makes sense. Maybe battery storage would be a little bit better. But what if we bought it? Okay, so on this one, the system cost, this is San Ysidro Senior Village, $316,000. And a 424% 25-year return on investment, right? So anybody who wants to take their slush fund or whatever and make money. Just start another fund and start reinvesting in my projects, Tara's projects, anybody who wants a little bit of return on investment. Give me 2 or 3%, you're doing great. But what does this look like over time? So, you know, this is the key. My operational budget on this project went down to $9,200. Okay, so my operational savings here, $47,000. So I really want to be clear with this. If you remember anything, remember this slide. Okay, so 51 units of senior housing for the formerly homeless. My operational savings over 30 years is $2 million. Okay, the big growing curve there is the growing cost of utilities. Just keep paying SCE, keep paying SGE. That's what they want you to do. The lines on the bottom are the lease cost and the upfront cost. The green cost is the purchase cost. So you can see it has a little bit of a peak angle to it. But we had money left over on this project. We were smart in building. We didn't have a whole lot of change orders. So we bought it for free. So our number is actually at 0. So the operational savings are going to be more than $2 million. And this is the message for the affordable housing developers out there and anybody who services them. What can you do with the savings? It can't be about proclaiming your greatness and hugging trees and preserving the environment, which is really important to all of us. What it really needs to be about is benefiting the people who are actually going to be living in the building. And these are people, you know, they're glory shots. These are people moving in on their first day who were formerly homeless into San Ysidro Village. So what can you do with this money? Okay, this is just the first step in social justice and environmental justice. Do you want to give the money to the utilities? They would love you to, right? It's a annuity for them. Would you rather hold on to it yourself as a developer of affordable housing? Would you like to preserve it and invest it in other things? We got plenty of ideas at National Core what we would like to do. It is about service and delivery, and we're in it for the long haul. And I think for anybody who's developing or designing, that's really got to be the message.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you to all of the panelists. It was fantastic presentations. We are going to move now into the pre-prepared Q&A section. So I've got some questions queued up that I'm going to ask the panelists. I want to reiterate, though, before we get started, that folks on the call can ask questions in the chat box. At the bottom, you'll see a box that says chat, another box that says Q&A. You can type your questions into those boxes, and after we get through the pre-prepared section, we can ask audience questions. So I'm going to kick it off, and Tim, I'm going to come back to you with this question. What got you interested in building electrification, and what was your first experience working on an all-electric project?
So I think I sort of gave it away, Matt, at the very beginning. I am an environmentalist, you know, so I am a tree hugger, but I don't win many arguments, especially working for what I consider to be a very fiscally conservative developer builder of affordable housing. So years ago, Ed Mazzaria, when I first met him and started asking him about the 2030 challenge, I said, how do you do this with your clients? How do you initiate and try to shoot for the 2030 goals with your clients? Do you tell your clients? And, you know, Ed's a huge guy and he just poked me in the chest and he says, you don't tell them anything. He said, just do it. And he said, you have to be subversive about this. And yeah, I'm not being very subversive because I'm talking to friends and colleagues on this. So I don't have many secrets these days about this stuff. But the goal now is I want to do it. I will be subversive, but I use economics as my shield on this, that I win the economic battle. And if I win the economic battle, I just sit around and I'm like, do you want to make money or do you not want to make money? If you don't want to make money, then why am I doing this, right? So really the end game here is what got me started was this idea that I believe that energy efficiency and sustainability needs to reach into the lowest lengths of the most underrepresented communities anywhere, right? I started out as a Peace Corps volunteer, putting 90-watt panels, powering a 9-watt car battery, you know, and little light bulbs here and there, you know, 25, 30 years ago. And that's just grown. It's just, when you see how this benefits working class people and poor people, suddenly you just say, this is a right, this makes sense. Now it's just a matter of how you use your energy and how you use your money. How do you express your values? And as developers of affordable housing or those who design for them, we express our values in how we design and build. And that's kind of what drives me to this day. I think it will probably be on my lips on my dying day.
Awesome. Okay, great. So I've got another question. This one is going to be for Jason. How are you thinking about ways to include deeper efficiency methods to offset costs and ensure that monthly utility costs stay low? And what are other strategies that offset these costs?
Yeah, I think, the question of keeping the utilities, low really comes back to the QAC, the California Utility Allowance Calculator. And that's mainly for affordable housing, tax credit funding projects. So this might not apply for the answer in all cases, but you can evaluate a lot of different strategies and review the utility allowance calculations. Obviously, our energy modeling software is using set profiles, and you're really limited on how you can adjust things. It's all based on Title 24 profile use of energy for, HVAC split system heat pumps. So when you're doing calculations for the utility allowance calcs, you really try to drive down the cost for the tenant who's actually going to pay the bill. And as Tim mentioned, then adding solar PV on top of it could even drive it down even further. And the whole catch here is that with a utility allowance calc, what it calculates on your monthly cost for the tenant, usually you have set max rates that you can charge the tenant, and thus by having more efficient equipment, you're able to then charge a little more rent to get payback on your investment in those higher efficiency systems. So.
Awesome, thank you. So next question we have here is, this one's for Tara. How do you engage with local communities to ensure that their perspective and needs are a part of project design?
Yeah, in general, not just relating to sustainability, obviously I think part of being a socially just organization is caring about the community that you're situated in. So it is important to us. We do a lot of community meetings, and we have started to do them at the very beginning now, before we really even have any kind of a baked design. And we do listening sessions. We are still subject to a lot of NIMBYism. So design is a tool that we can use to say, look, our mission is affordable housing. We're going to build affordable housing. So let's talk about how we can make it the best possible development for the community. So they do respond well to the energy efficiency conversation that we have when we present to them. It doesn't necessarily get them on our side, but some of the strategies we talk about are landscaping, sometimes parks or parklets or community gardens are things that we can use in terms of community benefits. One of the really exciting ones is one of our funding programs that people may have heard of is the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Funding, or Cap and Trade. And that brings significant benefit. Not only do we get funding to build our project, and obviously it incentivizes green projects near transit, but we also get a substantial sum of money to do transit infrastructure improvements in the immediate neighborhood. So that's a real benefit to the community, and they respond really well to that. A lot of times the people who are more opposed to our projects just want to know what's in it for me. They think it's going to somehow adversely impact them, so we need to show them what the benefits are.
Great, thanks, Tara. So this next question is for John. What challenges have you experienced creating all electric buildings, and what steps did you take to overcome those challenges, and words of advice for folks on the call who might be embarking on these projects?
I think I actually want to flip the question around a little bit, because I actually think it was way easier than we anticipated. I think when we started it, we're doing one project now that's in construction documents, and when we started the project, we made an assumption. We had the goal of doing all electric, and we made an assumption that there were going to be unforeseen challenges because we'd never done it before. That really kind of threw a wrench into the design process, and we found, and thankfully, we were working with really good energy modelers and mechanical engineers and plumbing engineers who had experience doing centralized heat pump water heaters, that it really wasn't that difficult at all. the space that's required for these systems is not very big. It allows us to not have to do solar preheat on our water, so you avoid having to put a big solar hot water array on the roof and all the equipment that goes with that. And that in turn affects your structure because you don't have to fit as much heavy equipment. So really what we're left with on the roof of our all-electric project is basically just PVs and mini split heat pumps, which don't take up much room at all because you can hide them behind parapets. So we actually found that as long as you have the right consultants on board who can really give you the input you need regarding sort of electrical loads and making sure your transformers are sized correctly and that you have all, sort of dot your I's and cross your T's with the utilities, that it's really not that difficult at all fitting in the equipment. We were actually quite surprised. So I really recommend that people do it.
Awesome. Thank you, John. So we've got a bunch of questions from folks who are participating. So I'm going to transition now to some of those questions. And I want to get some of the operational ones out of the way first. So one of the questions was, is this presentation being recorded and is it available to participants? And the answer to that is yes, it is being recorded and it will be posted on YouTube and folks can have access to it afterwards to pick up on some of that information. Another question that was asked was about AIA credits, and I believe that this presentation is eligible for AIA credits, so you can follow up with Hillary with further questions there. So I want to now jump into some of the more technical questions. So this question, the first one that we got came from Adrian Johnson. And it's, can you talk about the differences in equity outcomes for mixed income versus 100% affordable housing developments? So for this question, any of the panelists feel free to jump in. These questions aren't pre-assigned, they're asked by the audience.
So I'll throw in, Jason brought up the QAC. The California Utility Allowance calculation is a method that energy analysts and developers can use to estimate the probable energy use and cost for the affordable housing project. And it's going to be limited to TCAC funded projects. If you have HUD funding, Section 8 funding, probably not going to work for you. There's limitations on that. But if you have a TCAC funded project, if it's pure affordable, now you can actually start to take the benefits of a zero net energy building and distribute those into the building and to benefit the residents in a way that allows you to recuperate your investment. So really quickly, you're allowed to pay, the residents that we serve are typically limited to about 50% of area median income. Just estimate, it's $1,000 unit for a family of four, maybe earning $45,000 a year. Of that $1,000, they have to reserve a certain amount for utilities, and it's usually it's identified by the local housing authority. And in many parts of California, you can beat it with an energy efficient building. It's really hard to do in Santa Monica. It's really hard to do in Orange County. It's really hard to do in San Diego because those guys don't include cooling in your load. But as soon as you start to get to zero net energy buildings, now you can actually drive the utility costs down. And we are working on projects now where we've got the utility allowance down to the basic metering cost of $5 to $10 a month, compared to 40 or 50 in Santa Monica, compared to $120 in San Bernardino County. Now I'm making money. You can't do that with a mixed income project. So if you can isolate the funding for the affordable component of this, and it's probably a question for Tara or maybe someone else out there in the development community, can you isolate the funding? We have a project where we have multiple sources. So we have subdivided the second floor for one funding source from the first and the third. If you could do that with a mixed income project, maybe you can use the QAC, maybe. But it's a real stretch and it's a real limitation that a lot of times throws a monkey wrench into the process, because if I put something on the building, it's got to have an economic payback. I can't do it because, like I said, I'm a tree hugger, sure, but I can't give stuff away. I'm responsible for maintaining and operating that system. I've got to be able to recoup some costs so I can keep it operating. So it's mixed income is a real challenge. And this is why the market rate guys don't do it, because They can't use a QAC. They just have to appeal to the tree huggers.
Right, and I'll just also add that not only is the QAC a tool that we can use for 100% affordable, but we also get tax credit basis when we purchase solar panels as part of our upfront costs. We also can get solar tax credits that we can sell. So there are a lot of funding tools that we can use on the upfront costs that can be offset. Once you get into market rate or mixed income, it becomes more challenging, like Tim said.
Fantastic. Okay, so this next question comes from Laura Tugwell. She actually has two questions here. So the first is, when converting projects to all electric, electric panel size is a concern. Sometimes it is expensive and or difficult to get enough electrical power to accommodate all electric loads, especially when EV charging is being considered. Do you have any thoughts on this? And then the second question, separate vein, are there any passive house design all electric projects, since they require a fraction of the energy that conventional construction does, ultimately resulting in way less of an energy demand?
I guess I'll take a shot at the first question there, Matt. And Laura, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, most people are directing their attention to the savings on the gas line piping and how that could actually be mitigated and offset and reduced. So if you're removing the gas, work, and there's actually in that Redwood Energy report that I kind of mentioned, the Zero Electric All Emissions Multifamily Construction Guide, they do talk about kind of the saved gas cost as a way to move into more higher cost electric panel size and those things. So I think each project is its own project that you'd have to look at specifically.
Yeah, I can talk about passive house. This is something that we've looked at, but it's more common in Northern California. In Southern California, there's kind of a resistance to doing a really thick, well-insulated building envelope. It's more of a sort of the attitude that's endemic to Southern California is more like let natural breezes in and open up the window to make your apartment more comfortable and get ceiling fans going. So for the extra investment of the extra materials, we haven't yet found a project where we felt that it was really worth it in Southern California to do it, where it really is more effective to do to spend the money on heat pump water heaters and PVs. It just seems to make more sense. We've seen some single family homes with passive house design, but it hasn't scaled up yet to multifamily.
Great, thank you, John. So we've got an anonymous question here. Have you found alternatives to vinyl windows and vinyl floors in affordable housing projects?
Fiberglass is a good alternative for windows. Still does not price in line with vinyl. Don't do wood. I love wood. Too expensive for the affordable market. You can't do storefront aluminum thermally broken. Just bad idea environmentally, and the cost is just going to kill you. But there's hope in fiberglass. Vinyl's bad news for anybody paying attention to the red list and is really a true environmentalist. Chlorine is just bad thing. But vinyl, the benefits of vinyl windows in the building envelope are just extraordinary when you compare them to the alternatives. But I do have some hope for fiberglass.
Yeah, you can get really great energy performance out of fiberglass windows. And because fiberglass is a bit stiffer, you can also do larger window sizes in single pane glass, which is pretty great. One of the issues that we've seen with fiberglass window makers, especially in the high performance realm, like Alpine is a good example. They're based out of Denver, I think, is even over the last year, the lead times for fiberglass windows have really shot up. The companies that make them, they're not a lot, and the demand has just skyrocketed for fiberglass windows, which really says some positive things about the architectural community and how they're specifying windows. They're really looking at this sort of petrochemicals in how all the building materials are made. So in that sense, it's very encouraging. But for now, they're kind of hard to get. but we'll keep specifying them if they don't get value engineered.
Great. So we've got a question here from David. David asked, Tim, are the operational costs you were describing for house electrical only, or does it include the units? If residents pay for their own power, how does it impact your equation?
So it's a good question. I think I replied to David in the chat if anybody wants to take a look at that. But the short answer is the presentation that I did with San Ysidro Senior, it's a special needs project. So it is master metered. So the residents pay one lump sum for rent and utilities. So it was natural for us to try to get as much PV on it. But I do the same analysis when we're doing common area loads only. What you need to do is your energy analyst needs to isolate the common area energy loads independent of the rest of the building, and then take that same information and run it through the same software that you're going to use to anticipate the benefits of your PV and your battery. We have a senior project, 140 units that we're just finishing now, zero net energy, except for the boiler. It's the operational savings there. It's got a 410 kW system on it. For the common areas alone, it was the same equation. It was like $2 million worth of operational savings for a big project. When it's a big footprint, your common area energy loads, they're going to be $50,000 or $60,000 a year. So if you can get that down to $5,000 or $10,000 a year, it still makes economic sense. Prioritize for affordable housing developers. You got to prioritize your common areas first. Your long-term goal is organizational sustainability, and that starts at each property. When you start shedding off extra money at that property level, you'll do other things at that property level, and you won't have to worry about it as much. Once you do common area energy, then go into the units and try to use the QAC or hold out for the SOMA. SOMA rebates, solar and multifamily affordable housing, is a bit of a game changer for existing buildings. It's a bit of a Band-Aid, but it's free money, just like the SGIP rebate program for batteries is going to be an opportunity for some of the existing buildings.
Awesome. All right, next up, we've got a question from Luke. So Luke says, thank you to all the panelists, great presentations. There's been an increased attention paid to the impact of materials, both in terms of health impacts and carbon emissions due to manufacturing. John touched on it, but could you speak more to how you're incorporating healthy materials and low embodied carbon materials in design? On the ownership side, is this being discussed with design teams?
Yeah, this is something that we're just starting to look at in terms of embodied carbon. Really, where you can make the most impact is in your structural systems. And unfortunately, in the affordable housing market, you're pretty, especially in mid-rise, you don't have too much variation in structural systems. So then you get down to sort of finishes, windows. And I had a few. I'll just bring up the list in front of me. I had a few on my slides that I just pointed out in terms of eliminating fossil fuels, because we can talk about embodied carbon because that involves manufacturing processes and a whole lot of other things. But yeah, talking about vinyl windows is a big one. Anywhere where you see vinyl, so vinyl flooring, plastic siding, roofing and weather and vapor barriers are another one. Any sort of waterproofing, very difficult to get products that don't use petrochemicals. Also, wood preservatives, fire retardants, all sorts of chemical treatments. We just, as much as we can, that kind of stuff, we try to avoid with general notes and say we don't want to include this in our specifications, and yeah, we just go from there, and try not to use too many carpet tiles and vinyl flooring. Try to get better materials, but yeah, it's something that we're definitely looking at for sure.
Yeah, I think on the owner side, we are very cognizant of that as well. I mean, we're always trying to balance cost and trying to make sure we can rein in our budgets, but I definitely am looking more at what are the types of products, like when you have to make choices between this or that, what are the ones that are most going to benefit the resident health? And there's a lot of products out there now, a lot of low-hanging fruit, no VOC paints and things like that. But in terms of the embodied carbon issue, I know The Living Building Challenge does address that as part of the certification program, and that program hasn't been as widely adopted in affordable housing, mostly because most of our funding sources still recognize LEED or Energy Star sort of as the primary programs that they're familiar with. But TCAC is actually now looking at Living Building Challenge. But there's still a lot of costs associated with that program. But I think as the products become more readily available, we're able to adopt them more.
So let me just throw in something really quickly. Ed Mazzaria has a great graph that talks about the pathway to 50% fossil fuel reduction by 2030, which is the IPCC goals, if we're really gonna hit these targets. And he does the math, and 80% of the energy that we use between now and 2030 is gonna be embodied in the buildings. 20% is gonna be operational. So it's extraordinary the burden that needs to be placed on making good selections. Fortunately, affordable housing is using a lot of wood. It's possible we're going to find cross-laminated timber pricing and building codes that allow us to use it in dense places where it might be able to price out, we think, at 7 stories or so. But keep in mind, there was a question very early on: how is $400,000 affordable for an affordable housing project? You've got to control your costs. So you've got to be subversive with these approaches. You can't just go in and say, I'm going to do Living Building Challenge, unless you're Tara, then you can do it. But then you have to prove the point that you can do it without any cost impact. We're building, I just kicked it around, we build for about $130 a square foot right now. So for a 1,000 square foot unit, which is bigger than what we build, it's $130,000 of constructed cost. It's not the construction costs that really drive things up. It's the land costs, it's the legal costs. There's so many consultants involved in it. So, but everything that we talk about here that starts to tip the discussion towards going to spend more money, then you get back to this social justice and economic justice issue. You're making the units more expensive. How can we do this? I think there has to be a balance, and you've got to be subversive with your building material selections. Do the things that John is talking about. Do the tally calcs, understand your embodied energy footprint. How much CO2 per square foot, how many pounds of CO2 per square foot are going into your buildings? Do you know? I mean, we're looking at our carbon footprint organizationally of our operational energy, but we're starting to look at the operational energy that goes into buildings so we can start to track that. The 25-year goal that I have for the end of my career is going to be, we're going to be a carbon neutral organization in terms of operating and building. How we're going to get there, I don't know, but that's the goal. You just have to start looking at it. Once we start looking at it, we can start talking about it. Once we start talking about it, we can start sharing ideas, and now we make progress.
Great. So we've got a question from Michael here. Michael asks, what software do you recommend for early conceptual design feedback, Tally, Cove, and blank? Is there something an urban designer, non-architect / engineer can use to inform early conceptual and yield studies, which are typically done in SketchUp?
Sapphire is a great tool for those working in SketchUp. It's going to give you a little bit of a throttle as you design and you start to design, tell it where you're building and what your assemblies are, and it's really easy to toggle between it. It's going to give you your predicted EUI, and it's easy to keep your forms simple. The model that I showed was ISVE, which is more robust and meant to do much more detailed analysis later on. But it's a great tool if you want to get all in and start with conceptual and go into detailed conceptual analysis, PV analysis, HVAC system sizing, the full boat. That's a better tool. Architects, I think Sapphire is a really good tool. And don't overlook the free stuff like HEED and SPEED are free tools available from UCLA Energy Design Tool Groups. I do shoebox analysis with those tools all the time, and I put them side by side with the IES shoebox analysis that I do, and the numbers are the same. So there's a lot of free stuff out there.
Yeah, also plug Climate Consultant, which is released by UCLA. It's a great little tool that just gives you a really broad overview of sort of prevailing wind patterns and temperatures and sun access. So that's also a great tool. But as Tim said, yeah, free tools are really great, and you don't need anything complicated. It can be really simple.
So one last piece going, at the end of Climate Consultant, there's a really nifty feature in the design guidelines that will link you out to the 2030 palette. Go into the 2030 palette and find your ideas. And if you're a really good architect and you want to take advantage of it, do what Koenig Eisenberg was and start populating those swatches with your work. because those people who are out there looking to see who does it. If people ask me who we should be hiring for sustainability, I'm like, go see who's on the 2030 palette.
That's a great website. 2030 Palette's a great website for learning about those passive design strategies that I was mentioning earlier. So really good.
Great. Okay, so I've got a question. I'm going to combine two questions here. These come from Isamar and Hillary. So has anyone effectively used a microgrid system on affordable housing projects? What have been the pros and cons? And lastly, what has been the benefit of being grid independent for funding purposes? And then Hillary's question sort of gets at this as well, but have any of you or your team studied on-site battery storage, either to shave peak loads or for islanding backup during disasters or blackouts?
You guys, I can do this one in 2 minutes or less.
Go for it.
So really quickly, the grid, grid disconnected or microgrids are only going to work when you get neighborhood scale projects. We have one in San Bernardino. It just doesn't pencil out. You need a really big area, you need a lot of density, and you need to be able to store and distribute, and it adds cost. So the key is rooftop solar, and then start looking at your battery storage as a way to bank some electricity. But even though we should all be planning for battery storage, right now the economics do not pencil out for affordable housing in just about every utility zone that I've looked at, that the demand charges for your common areas just aren't large enough for you to make any money on a battery storage system. The battery storage system pricing is about where PV was 10 years ago. It's coming down, but I look at it and I'm like, I would really like to do a battery storage on San Ysidro. And they say, what's the payback? And I'm like, 32 years. And then they say, no, please, no, not for us, not right now. But it's worth keeping an eye on, and the SGIP rebates are out there, which comes from cap and trade funding as well. When that stuff comes for free, you got to have it wired into your building. You need to design for the space. And don't forget about electrifying transportation, that you can go out there now and you can buy a used Fiat 500e, 3 years old, for $5,000 on cars.com. If your developer gives you a place to plug that in, then why wouldn't you want to build the infrastructure and then charge them for the electricity that they're using? So, things like that, these are the things that we're talking about. We're trying to future-proof and plan for one EV charging space for every single apartment that we build. We may not install it, but we're going to increase the electrical service size. We're going to put a load management system in, which will charge up to 5 spaces off of a single breaker. And then we're going to put in the underground conduits so that 10 years from now, when we start driving electric, we're going to start landing those things on our properties and stop encouraging people to use fossil fuels. Sorry, that was 3 minutes, you guys.
Great. Let's see. So we've got a question from Avery here. How do you see these strategies being deployed across different climate zones, particularly in the extremely hot and the extremely cold, while still maintaining comfortable, well-designed indoor spaces, while at the same time staying on budget? Thank you.
So passive house is a great option for building in extreme climates. I would say I saw some really great presentations by some architects in New York who have done high rises at passive house standards. So not quite to net zero or zero net carbon, but using passive house standards, you can really cut down your energy use in extremely hot or really cold climates. So like I said before, so in Southern California, we haven't noticed that, or we haven't been able to do a project like that. But I think in extreme climates, it tends to work better. Even in the desert, it can work better.
Great.
Yeah, I guess can I say one other note on that with John? There are some really low temperature performing heat pumps that will work in colder climates. And the one thing I wanted to mention about a lot of the domestic hot water heat pumps, or even HVAC heat pumps, I think obviously looking at the temperature ranges of where they're used, and there's a lot of information out there of those things where they can be used in those extreme climates and super cold areas too. So
yeah, EcoTope has written a bunch of white papers on the effectiveness of heat pump water heaters if anyone's interested, but they're based out of Seattle. So if it can work in Seattle, it can work in climates that have sort of a low bottom range temperature range.
Great. Okay, so the next question that we have is from Christina. Do you see WELL, capital W-E-L-L, building standard focusing on human-centered wellness being further adopted for affordable housing?
Yeah, that's one of the building standards that is not yet sort of adopted by a lot of our funding sources, but I know we've just been trying to adopt as many of the principles into our designs as possible, and that's the direction we give our architects. So we're not certifying necessarily, but we use a lot of those principles of active strategies, incentivizing, and then the healthy indoor air quality. So yeah.
Yeah, for Green Dinosaur's perspective, that guide like Tara's using is really a second checkbox, so you understand that you're designing really well to ensure everyone's health and wellness. And it's been a great tool on a number of jobs that we're working on.
Great. So we've got an anonymous question here. It says, can you elaborate on the preferred configuration for electric heat pump water heaters? Are multiple tanks in a central mechanical room feasible on larger projects, or do architects need to start planning for smaller groups of tanks distributed throughout a project, or even one per unit? San Jose, for example, has recently prohibited gas, so this is no longer just a good idea, it is required.
So when we were designing our system, we're going off what our engineer told us we could do. So take this with a grain of salt, but we were able to do, for a 64 unit project, in a fairly small room, one centrally located room on the ground floor with two very large sort of commercial sized heat pumps and 3 storage tanks. So it didn't take up a whole lot of room. We looked at an option where we distributed it, maybe put one unit on the roof at one end of the building and one unit on the south at the other end. But it turns out that, you know, if you can get enough space off of the roof, you can get the added benefit of added PVs. So you know, if the room's pretty small, then we were able to fit it on the ground floor, and we had more room for PVs. So it was actually not too bad from that perspective.
So you guys, let's talk about price, and I'll give away what we know today because I have to make the economic case for this. My organization, even though I want to go all electric, will only do it when it makes economic sense. The COMEX are too expensive. The difference between the delta between a 97% efficient natural gas boiler and a COMEX is about $250,000 for a 50 unit project. Forget about it. Okay, buy your carbon offsets if you feel guilty about natural gas, and buy some solar thermal for $100,000 if that's your option. It doesn't work. Sandin is a game changer, but it's brand new to the energy code. We're pricing Sandin now on par with the 97% efficient natural gas boilers. So now we're at parity in terms of cost, and I can get to zero net energy with the Sandin water heater for about 1 kW or slightly less per unit. I can get that zero net energy hot water solution so much more affordably than I can with a natural gas boiler with the solar thermal system. Natural gas solar thermal systems, oh my God, I've started on looking at projects that they've walked them in, the design team, into a 65% solar thermal system for a 100 unit project that covers half of the roof at a cost of $300,000. I had a heart attack. I was just like, who's guiding you guys? So the last piece of this is the individual heat pump water heaters, which is we're doing on a couple projects. This is what Tara's doing with her projects now. The Ream Prestige Series individual heat pump water heater is great. They just came out with the Gen 5. It is now decentralizing your hot water. So if you're worried about conserving water, it's a great solution. But when we price it, our plumbing costs go up by about $1,000 per unit. You know, we plummet about $20,000 per unit. If we go with an individual heat pump water heater, we're at 21. And I walk around and I'm like, it's only $1,000. I'll make it up somewhere else. But the guys I work with, they're like, no, $1,000 times 100 units, that's $100,000. Where are you going to pull that from? So I like that option. I think it's my preferred. The Reams are great. The Sandins could be a game changer. We're looking at it closely. I've always said this, it sucks to be first, right? Somebody's got to do the Sandin locally and look at it. We're going to make a trip up to San Francisco as a team to look at it because I've got 3 projects and all the construction managers I work with are freaking out. They're saying, We don't like this idea. We want CCSM to do it first, and then we'll study their projects. So anyway, that's the gist of it. COMAC was around for a while as a solution before Standard came up, but when we priced it and we looked at other projects, it's just killing them.
Awesome. Well, I think this is maybe a good place to start to wrap up the presentation. It's 5:28 right now. I want to just reiterate a couple of things. So this presentation has been recorded, so folks will be able to access that on YouTube after the fact. If you like some of the materials that were shared, you can follow up with Hillary and see about getting some of those PDFs for your own use. And this presentation is eligible for AIA credit. This is hopefully the first in a series of presentations, so keep an eye out on your inbox for invites for further topics. There's a lot to cover in the world of building decarbonization, and AIA aims to cover those topics thoroughly. So thank you everybody for joining today. We really appreciate your time. And I think with that, we're gonna end 1 minute early.
Yay! Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.